Welcome. We're diving deep today into a sort of philosophical exploration. Think maybe Vienna, turn of the century, grappling with big ideas.
Exactly. We're looking at desire, morality, repression, culture, power, all those deep currents beneath the surface.
The forces that really shape us, often without us even realizing it.
It's that tension, isn't it, between what we deeply want and what society allows or expects.
And guiding some of our thinking today, we have this perspective, let's call it Person A. It's quite analytical, perhaps a bit provocative, definitely focused on morality, repression, and power. Maybe echoes of Freud for those familiar.
And I suppose I'm here as Person B, asking questions, pushing back a little, trying to get underneath the surface of these ideas. Always curious.
Great. So let's just jump in. A starting point could be, well, the way female desire has historically been policed.
Policed is a good word for it. Controlled, managed.
Think about someone like Marie Antoinette. Obviously, there's the whole political dimension, the revolution.
Okay.
But could her fate also be seen as something else? Like a kind of cultural exorcism? A reaction against a certain kind of female desire, maybe excess, that broke the rules.
That's a fascinating interpretation. You know, Freud talked about Trieb, the drive, the basic instincts.
Right.
And he argued civilization is built on suppressing those drives. So when those drives, especially in women, push against the accepted boundaries, the reaction can be, well, violent.
So the guillotine wasn't just political punishment.
In this view, it becomes a symbol, doesn't it? A very stark, brutal symbol of society trying to manage, even extinguish female desire that it sees as chaotic or dangerous.
Okay. And the French Revolution itself, all that upheaval, that energy, could that be viewed through this lens as a kind of mass sublimation?
How do you mean exactly?
Well, like taking all that raw aggression, that societal tension, and channeling it into these big ideals. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Like a collective letting off steam.
Ah, I see. Yes, that's a really interesting way to frame it. Redirecting immense psychic energy towards these collective goals, a societal sublimation.
But here's the twist, right?
Go on.
During this exact time of supposed liberation, what happened to women's rights?
They were actually curtailed, weren't they? Pushed out of public life.
Precisely. That's the paradox. You have this explosion of freedom, but simultaneously, new or maybe just reinforced, constraints are placed on women, back towards morality, domesticity.
So what does that suggest? Some underlying anxiety about female power, maybe. About unchecked female desire, even amidst calls for general liberty.
It certainly makes you wonder what was really being protected or feared beneath the revolutionary slogans.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Fast forward. Victorian England. Hysteria.
Ah, yes. Hysteria, the great medical mystery of the age, or so they framed it.
It seems like women's, unmet needs, suppressed emotions, they just got labeled as a disease, pathologized. Completely, it became this convenient diagnosis for, well, almost anything a doctor couldn't easily explain in a female patient. Frustration, anxiety, sexual desire, all lumped together.
And the treatment, I mean, it's almost unbelievable now, pelvic massages by doctors.
To induce paroxysms, yes. It's jarring, isn't it? A society obsessed with purity, with female modesty, yet facilitating this very intimate procedure under a medical banner.
A huge contradiction.
A massive one. It suggests that even in a deeply repressed society, the underlying needs, the drives, they don't just disappear. They find outlets, sometimes in very strange, distorted ways.
So this culture is outwardly trying to stamp down female desire, but then it creates this clinical loophole.
Exactly. It allowed them to manage the problem without acknowledging its root cause, the repression itself. By calling it medical, it kept the moral facade intact.
And then the invention of the vibrator follows from that, right?
Yeah.
As a medical tool initially.
Yes, initially marketed to physicians to make the treatment less labor-intensive for them. It just underscores the whole paradox. Was it about care or control? Or maybe just efficiency in managing something inconvenient?
It really muddies the water around liberation versus management.
Absolutely. Control can wear many masks, even the mask of medical care.
This brings us back to those core Freudian ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Eros and thanatos, the life drive and the death drive.
The fundamental duality. Eros pushing towards life, connection, creation, pleasure. Thanatos pulling towards dissolution, aggression, destruction, stillness.
So how do these play out with female desire and its suppression?
Well, you could see the suppression itself, the moral policing, the medicalization, the historical violence as an expression of thanatos, a kind of cultural violence trying to shut down or control the life force.
And desire itself.
Desire, especially female desire in this context, its persistence despite everything. That's Eros, isn't it? The life drive, pushing back, asserting itself, refusing to be completely extinguished. It's this constant battle.
And you feel that internally too, don't you? That conflict between what you want and what society, or your own internalized voice, tells you is acceptable. That shame, that guilt.
Oh, absolutely. That internal conflict is where so much of this plays out. Freud argued civilization requires us to renounce some of our instinctual gratification.
But it seems like historically women were asked to renounce more.
Disproportionately so, yes. Their desires were often framed as more dangerous, more disruptive to the social order, particularly a patriarchal order. So the internal conflict, the guilt, could be amplified.
Which makes you think about morality itself. Is it just about right and wrong? Or is it also a tool, a way to manage perceived chaos?
Very much a tool for social control from this perspective, a way to maintain cohesion, predictability, and female desire, historically, has often been positioned as that unpredictable, potentially chaotic force that needs managing.
Enter the superego.
Exactly. The internalized authority, the voice of parents, teachers, society, culture, all distilled into this inner judge that enforces the roles.
And you were saying, for women, that judge could be particularly harsh.
Often, yes. Reflecting those societal messages that their needs or desires are somehow secondary or selfish or dangerous, it internalizes the policing mechanism.
You see it in the language, don't you? The words used for female sexuality versus male sexuality.
Oh, absolutely. Think about words like slut or promiscuous. They carry such a heavy weight of moral judgment.
Compared to how male desire is often excused or even celebrated sometimes.
There's a clear double standard. The language itself reinforces the idea that female sexuality is inherently more problematic, requires more vigilance. It shapes perception.
But despite all this pressure, desire finds ways out. You see pushback, attempts at reclaiming sexuality, maybe things like feminist pornography or women reclaiming derogatory terms. Is that real liberation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's definitely a form of resistance. It's Eros pushing back, trying to redefine the narrative. But we have to ask, can these acts of rebellion themselves be co-opted? Can they be turned into new products, new trends that ultimately still serve the existing systems of power or commerce?
So is the mainstream celebration of female sexuality today truly empowering? Or could it be, in some ways, another form of discipline, shaping desire into forms that are, palatable or marketable?
It's a complex balance. There's genuine empowerment happening for sure, but there's also the risk of it becoming superficial, a performance of liberation rather than the real thing, a new way to conform, perhaps.
Like the architecture of repression isn't just external anymore, it gets inside.
Deeply internalized. That's why understanding the superego is so critical.
But why? Why do women, or people generally, internalize these demands? Why make sacrifices for belonging?
Well, the need for belonging, for connection, is fundamental. It's tied to survival, both physically and psychologically. Eros drives us towards connection.
But Thanatos, where does that fit in here?
In this internal struggle, Thanatos might manifest as that pull towards self-denial, towards conforming, even if it means sacrificing authentic desire. Because conformity offers safety, acceptance. Society often rewards that self-sacrifice, especially in women.
So belonging comes at the price of yourself, sometimes.
A degree of self-renunciation, yes. That seems to be the bargain often implicitly offered.
What about something contemporary like mommy porn, books like 50 Shades? Seems like it's about female desire agency.
On the surface, yes, it tapped into something, clearly.
But could there be a Freudian reading? Like, is it sublimation again?
You could definitely make that argument. Is the raw energy of desire being channeled into narratives that, while seeming edgy, ultimately reinforce pretty traditional power dynamics, often featuring dominant men, conventional romance tropes?
So the transgression is sort of contained, made safe.
Potentially, yes. It allows for the fantasy of breaking rules without actually challenging the underlying structures too much. Sublimation within familiar boundaries.
And the superego. You mentioned it can be especially punitive for women, leading to guilt.
Yes. Shaped by generations of conditioning, patriarchal expectations, lessons about self-sacrifice being virtuous. The internalized shoulds can be incredibly powerful and unforgiving.
Guilt as the price for deviating.
Freud saw guilt as the price of civilization itself. the tension between our desires and societal rules. But for women, whose desires were often seen as inherently more threatening, that guilt could be magnified. Think of the fallen woman trope.
Right. A single misstep could define her entirely.
Marked by transgression. But guilt, paradoxically, also glues society together, doesn't it?
How so?
By feeling guilty when we break the rules, we affirm the importance of those rules. It shows we're part of the group, that we accept its terms, it offers integration, belonging.
In exchange for autonomy?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
That's the trade-off. Is it always a fair trade? Who benefits most? These are the critical questions.
Let's think historically again. After World War II, women had entered the workforce in huge numbers.
A major societal shift.
And then came this big push for them to return home to domestic roles, framed as the right thing, the moral thing to do.
A huge cultural effort, yes. Rosie the Riveter becomes the happy homemaker.
Could you see that as society trying to contain female desire and agency, which had maybe found new expressions during the war?
Absolutely. It looks like a deliberate reassertion of traditional gender roles, channeling female energy back into the private sphere, away from public influence or economic independence, containment on a massive scale.
And maybe another form of sublimation, praising women's nurturing roles, their emotional labor within the home.
While implicitly limiting other avenues for their talents and ambitions. Yes, emotional labor, caregiving, essential, valuable work, no question. But when it's presented as the only or primary virtuous path, it becomes a form of channeling, of sublimation that restricts other forms of self-expression.
What about outright resistance, though? Throughout history, women have pushed back.
Definitely, though often at great cost.
Like the women accused of witchcraft you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Embodying uncontrolled Eros.
Exactly. They were often women who didn't fit the mold, healers, widows living independently, women who were outspoken or perceived as sexually non-conforming, seen as a threat to the patriarchal order.
And the reaction was brutal. Thanatos in action.
A violent suppression of perceived deviance. It shows the extreme danger historically associated with challenging these norms.
Does that resonate today? The backlash against movements like #MeToo. Could that stem from a similar fear? Fear of losing control, of power dynamics shifting?
It's a plausible connection. When long-standing power structures are challenged, those who benefit from them often react defensively. The anxieties around #MeToo could certainly reflect fears about disrupting traditional gender roles and the potential loss of established privileges or control.
It operates on so many levels. Inside our heads, the internalized policing.
And outside, in the societal systems, the laws, the cultural narrative.
They reinforce each other.
It's a complex feedback loop. Internalized norms shape our behavior, which then upholds the external systems, which in turn reinforce the internal norms. It's hard to untangle.
Even something like contraception. The pill.
Yeah.
Hugely liberating in one sense.
Undeniably. Greater control over reproduction, bodily autonomy.
Would it also put the responsibility, the burden, almost squarely on women, didn't it?
It did shift the practical burden, yes. Monitoring cycles, taking the pill, dealing with side effects. While empowering, it also became another domain where women's bodies were subject to management and expectation. It raises questions about shared responsibility.
And then there's capitalism's role in all this. How desire, especially female desire, gets commodified.
Capitalism is incredibly adept at absorbing and selling back almost anything, including rebellion and desire.
So the celebration of female sexuality can just become about selling products.
Yeah.
Focusing on appearance, on achieving some ideals sold by advertisers.
It can definitely steer things that way.
Yeah.
Focusing on the external, the superficial, the right look, the right product can become a substitute for addressing deeper issues of autonomy, pleasure, and self-acceptance. It creates needs and then offers purchasable solutions.
Is that displacement? You mentioned that earlier. Redirecting energy.
It could be seen that way. Channeling the psychic energy related to desire and dissatisfaction towards consumption, towards acquiring things, rather than confronting the underlying constraints or seeking more fundamental changes. A distraction, perhaps.
But we do see breaks in the pattern. Moments of rupture. Things like feminist porn challenging the male gaze.
Yes, attempts to create alternative narratives, to reclaim sexuality on different terms. These are important acts of resistance.
But even those can get co-opted, right? Turned into a niche market.
That's always the risk. Anything that gains traction can potentially be absorbed and commodified by the dominant culture or market forces. It doesn't negate the initial act of resistance, but it complicates the idea of a simple liberation.
So it really is this constant negotiation between the individual trying to express desire authentically and the culture trying to shape, control, or sell it back to them.
A continuous push and pull, seen in big cultural moments, but also in everyday choices and acts of quiet resistance. It's about navigating instinct and morality, freedom, and the need to belong.
This whole discussion feels unsettling. Like even movements meant to liberate might inadvertently create new kinds of control.
That's the paradox of the civilizing wound, perhaps. Progress isn't always linear. Sometimes what looks like freedom can contain its own subtle forms of repression.
Like online empowerment.
Right.
All the curated images on Instagram, for example.
Right. It presents a certain image of liberated desire, but it's often highly performative, shaped by algorithms and tied to consumption. It's not just selling products, it's selling identities, prescribed ways of being liberated. You could almost call it sublimation on steroids.
So when does freedom become just another cage? When the superego dictates not just what's forbidden, but also the correct, approved way to seek pleasure.
Exactly. It's a state where you might feel freer in some ways, but you're also constantly measuring yourself against new, perhaps even more insidious standards.
What about something like wellness culture?
Wellness.
Yep.
Ostensibly about self-care, health, empowerment. But it can also become this relentless pressure for self-optimization, constant improvement, consuming the right foods, products, experiences. The guilt shifts, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Maybe the guilt isn't so much about failing old moral standards, but about failing to meet wellness goals, not meditating enough, not eating clean enough, not optimizing your potential. The superego adapts, finding new ways to enforce conformity.
And the control feels invisible sometimes.
Yeah.
Less like direct prohibition, more like subtle shaving of desires before we're even fully aware of them.
Precisely. Modern control often works through suggestion, through shaping the environment, managing choices in ways that feel natural or inevitable. The ego might even mistake these external nudges for its own authentic desires.
It comes back to that Freudian idea that civilization needs repression, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That there's always going to be this gap, this dissatisfaction between what we instinctually want and what society allows.
He certainly believed that, an inherent tension leading to a baseline level of discontent or malaise.
And maybe women's dissatisfaction, historically dismissed or pathologized, was actually signaling something important about the flaws in those societal structures.
That's a powerful thought. Perhaps that discontent wasn't just a personal failing, but a kind of embodied critique of a system that demanded too much sacrifice, especially from them.
And today, maybe the superego isn't just one voice, but fragmented. All these conflicting messages from ads, influencers, media, peers.
Creating a cacophony of shoulds. It can lead to this pervasive, diffuse guilt, right? Not necessarily tied to a specific wrongdoing, but a constant feeling of inadequacy, of not measuring up on multiple fronts simultaneously.
A kind of free-floating anxiety and guilt.
Fed by constantly comparing ourselves to curated ideals.
Do we see real resistance to this? People trying alternative lifestyles?
Absolutely. Attempts to step outside conventional norms, whether it's minimalism, communal living, different relationship structures. These represent ongoing negotiations, trying to find ways of living that feel more authentic.
But those alternatives often require privilege, don't they? And they can get commodified too.
Yes, that's the constant challenge. True alternatives often exist at the margins and require resources or social capital. And they are always vulnerable to being repackaged and sold back to the mainstream, potentially diluting their transformative power.
So we're left with this duality. Repression is maybe necessary for society to function, but it also breeds dissatisfaction.
It seems to be the inherent contradiction Freud pointed towards.
And dismissing women's historical dissatisfaction might mean we've overlooked a kind of wisdom, a deeper understanding of the costs of this contradiction.
It's possible. Perhaps that experience holds crucial insights into the inherent tensions within any social order.
Ultimately, it feels like we're all caught up in these systems, complicit in ways we don't even realize.
We are products of our culture, even as we try to shape it. It's an ongoing struggle, a constant negotiation within ourselves and with the world around us.
This has been intense, a really deep dive into desire, control, all those hidden forces. We've brought in ideas like tribe, sublimation, Eros and thanatos, the superego, guilt, hoping to shed some light.
And showing how relevant these concepts still feel, perhaps even more so in our complex modern world. It's not just historical analysis, it's about understanding the dynamics playing out right now.
We really hope this gets you thinking about these forces in your own life and the culture you see around you.
And maybe leaves you with a question to wrestle with. To what extent does our pursuit of individual freedom or striving for self-expression unknowingly end up reinforcing the very structures that subtly constrain us?
A lot to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into desire and repression.
Until next time.